I still remember the exact sound that started everything. It wasn't the howl of a coyote or the call of an owl, or even the rustle of a big cat moving through the dark. It was softer, almost human, like a wounded child trying not to cry. It was 1989, and the rainy season had deshadowed the soil heavy and the air thick over our little farm in the mountains of southern Costa Rica. The coffee plants sewed dark lines across the slopes, and at night the fog would gather low, like a living thing crawling between the trees. I had walked those paths so many times that I could cross them blindfolded. That night, however, the forest felt different, as if it was watching me back. I was returning from checking the irrigation channels near the upper part of the property. The lantern in my hand painted a weak yellow tunnel through the mist. Crickets screamed from the undergrowth. Frogs answered from the ditches, and the familiar symphony of the night wrapped around me. Yet beneath all that, I heard it again. That soft, broken sound. A whimper. I stopped. The path split just ahead. One trail went down toward the house. The other climbed toward a small patch of wild forest we never cut, out of respect for my father's old superstition. "Some places don't want us," he used to say. "We work around them." The sound had come from that direction, the place we always left alone. For a moment I thought about going straight home. My shirt was damp from the mist, my boots were heavy with mud, and my mother would be waiting with questions if I took too long. But something in that whimper cut through my tiredness. It didn't sound like an animal defending itself. It sounded like someone who had already given up. I turned toward the forbidden trees. The air grew colder as I left the coffee rows behind. The lantern light bounced off wet trunks and big leaves shining like metal. The smell of earth became denser, almost sweet. The sound came again, closer now, but weaker, as if the creature was losing the strength to call out. "Hola," I whispered into the dark, even though I knew whatever was there wouldn't answer in Spanish. "What are you?" Branches brushed my shoulders as I moved forward. Then, suddenly, the ground dropped a little into a shallow depression hidden by ferns. My boot slid, and I instinctively grabbed a trunk to keep from falling. The lantern swung, and its beam landed on something that didn't belong there. At first, my mind refused to accept what I was seeing. It was curled up against a mossy rock, half covered by leaves like a broken doll someone had abandoned in the forest. Thin, too thin, with limbs that looked almost fragile. Its skin had a strange gray-blue tone, not like a corpse, not like any animal I knew, but something in between. The head was proportionally larger than the body, smooth with no hair. The skull elongated in a way that made it look both newborn and ancient. And the eyes were open. Two black liquid orbs stared at me, reflecting my tiny lantern as if swallowing all its light. There were no whites, no visible pupils, just endless darkness. Yet I didn't feel hatred coming from them. I didn't feel rage. I felt something I didn't expect from a creature so alien to me. I felt fear. My first instinct, the one that belongs to every human raised on stories of monsters and demons, screamed at me to run. My heart hammered, my muscles tightened, and for half a second I almost turned around and fled back to the comfort of my house lights. But it tried to move. Its hand, if I can call it that, lifted shakily from the leaves. Long, delicate fingers trembled in the air, reaching toward me and stopping halfway, as if the effort was too much. Its chest rose and fell quickly in shallow breaths. When it tried to make that sound again, it came out as a faint, broken exhale, like air escaping from a punctured lung. I realized it wasn't attacking me. It was pleading. My fear didn't disappear, but it changed shape. It became something heavier, more complicated. A knot of terror and pity twisted together. I slowly crouched, forcing my knees not to give out. Up close, I could see faint lines across its skin, like veins of light that no longer glowed. It smelled faintly of wet stone and metal, not of rot, not of blood. "You're hurt," I said, my voice barely audible over the forest. "You're dying." I didn't know what else to do, so I did what we do with any living thing struggling for life. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small cloth bundle my mother had given me earlier. leftover bread and a piece of cheese. I hesitated, then tore the bread into smaller pieces and placed them on a clean rock between us, within its reach but not too close. The creature watched every movement, its eyes following my hands like precise instruments. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with an effort that made its whole body shake, it extended that long, thin hand and dragged one piece of bread toward itself. Its fingers brushed the tip of mine. The contact was like touching ice and static at the same time. A quick flash went through my head, an image I couldn't understand, a red horizon, a sky without stars, and a feeling so strong it stole my breath. Loneliness. I gasped and pulled my hand back. The creature froze, as if afraid I would change my mind and take the food away. I didn't. I left the bread there and slowly stood up, my legs shaking. "I'll bring more," I whispered, surprising myself with my own words. "If you're still here tomorrow, I'll bring more." It blinked once, slowly, almost like a nod. In that moment, under the wet, breathing forest of Costa Rica in 1989, I made a decision without understanding its weight. I decided to keep its existence a secret, and I decided to feed it. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those black, endless pupils staring at me from the moss, the trembling hand reaching for the bread, and that flash of alien loneliness that had burned through my mind. I lay awake, listening to the distant croak of frogs and the occasional bark of a dog, wondering if, by dawn, the creature would be dead or gone. With the first pale light of morning, I made my decision. I wrapped extra food in cloth, more bread, some fruit, even a small piece of cooked yuca, and slipped out before anyone else was fully awake. My mother called from the kitchen, asking where I was going so early. I lied. I told her I was checking the upper irrigation again. Farmers don't question extra work, so she accepted the answer. The path up the mountain felt different in daylight. The ghosts of the night vanished, replaced by birdsong and the smell of wet leaves warming under the rising sun. Yet my chest was tight. A part of me hoped I had imagined everything, that I would reach the hidden hollow and find nothing but leaves and mud. It would be easier that way. But life rarely chooses the easy way. As I approached the patch of untouched forest, my steps slowed. Every twig crack, every rustle made my heart race. I carefully descended into the small depression where I had seen him. Yes, him, because by then I had started to think of the creature as more than a thing. He was still there. He was lying in almost the exact same position, but his eyes were closed. For a terrifying second, I thought he was dead. Then I noticed the faint rise and fall of his chest, shallow but steady. The pieces of bread I had left were gone. Not a crumb remained. Relief washed through me so suddenly that I had to sit down on a nearby root. "I came back," I murmured, as if he could understand me. "I told you I would." Carefully, I unwrapped the cloth and placed the food on the same flat rock as la noche anterior. A banana, peeled and split into pieces. More bread. The small piece of yuca. I hesitated, then reached out and touched his forearm, lighter this time, prepared for whatever image might invade my head. The cold and static sensation ran up my fingers again, but this time the vision was different. I saw, for less than a heartbeat, a curved wall of metal glowing faintly from within. A sensation of falling. A flash of light that wasn't lightning. Then darkness, followed by impact. Hard, violent, final. A crash. I pulled my hand back and looked around instinctively, as if I might spot a hidden ship lying somewhere beyond the trees. But the forest just stared back at me, innocent and ancient. He stirred. Slowly, with visible effort, he turned his head toward the rock where the food rested. One long hand dragged itself across the ground, closer, inch by inch. The movement looked painful, but determined. I couldn't help myself. I moved the rock closer, until he didn't have to stretch so far. His fingers brushed mine again and another image flickered. This time I saw a sky full of strange lights moving in perfect lines, like organized stars crossing a black ocean. There was no sound, only a heavy feeling of urgency. Then it vanished. leaving me with a faint headache and 1,000 more questions. He picked up a small piece of banana and brought it to what I assumed was his mouth. There were no visible lips, just a subtle opening that appeared and closed again. He ate slowly, mechanically, as if his body was following instructions it barely remembered. "Can you understand me?" I asked softly. The absurdity of my own question made me smile for a second. "Do you know where you are?" No words came, no sound. Instead, his eyes opened fully and met mine. It felt like falling into a well. Not because he showed me anything specific this time, but because, por un momento, I had la certeza de que él estaba tentando medir algo en mí, like a doctor sizing up a patient or an animal deciding whether a stranger was threat or shelter. The intensity of that look was almost too much. I had to look away first. "I won't tell anyone," I whispered, without deciding to say it before I spoke. "If they find you, they won't help you, they'll lock you up, or worse." The forest answered for him, a bird calling somewhere above, a branch creaking under its own weight. He blinked once, slowly, and lowered his head again, as if the simple act of staying awake was exhausting. That morning I stayed longer. I watched how he breathed, how his thin chest expanded cautiously, like fragile glass that could crack with each inhale. I noticed faint marks along his side, almost like burns or impact bruises, dark against the strange skin. He was hurt. Badly hurt. No doctor I knew could treat that. No hospital in my country or any other was equipped to handle a being like him. So it fell to me. When I finally got up to leave, the sun was already higher than it should be. I knew my absence would be noticed. Before climbing out of the hollow, I turned back one last time. "I'll return at night," I promised. "With more food, more water, and blankets, maybe. I don't know what you need, but I'll try." This time there was no vision, no flash, no cold shock up my arm. He simply moved his hand the slightest bit in my direction. Not an accident, not a twitch, a gesture. That was the day the secret stopped being a strange encounter in the forest and became something else. A responsibility. A weight. A bond. By 1990, while the rest of the world worried about politics, economies, and things they could see on television, I had begun a quiet routine no one knew about. By then, I was no longer just a young farmer. I was the guardian of something that did not belong to this world. The first time the sky changed because of him, I thought I was going mad. By 1991, visiting the hidden hollow had become part of my life. In the beginning, I went once a day, then twice. I learned quickly that he preferred the dim hours, dawn and dusk, when the light was soft and the air cooler. In the full heat of midday, he almost shut down, his skin taking on a duller tone, his breathing slowing so much that I often checked to make sure he was still alive. I brought food, always simple things, bananas, yuca, bread, sometimes small bits of cooked vegetables. I learned that he tolerated some fruits better than others. Pineapple made him tremble, so I never brought it again. Water was essential. He drank carefully, but his hands shook less each week. The more stable his body became, the stranger my mind felt. The visions hadn't stopped. They had evolved. At first they were broken flashes, crashes, red horizons, metal corridors. But as the months passed, the images grew longer, like scenes from a silent film projected directly into my skull. If I touched his arm, his shoulder, sometimes just brushed one of those long, cold fingers, I would see pieces of his world. Not just landscapes, but sensations. Gravity that felt wrong, air that tasted cleaner. A constant hum, like a distant engine beneath everything. One evening, I was sitting beside him on the damp ground, my back against the mossy rock he used as shelter. The forest was a dark silhouette around us, the last traces of daylight thinning above the treetops. I had just refilled a small metal cup with water and offered it to him. When his hand touched mine to take it, something different happened. The vision didn't show his world. It showed mine. I saw the coffee fields from above, like a bird might see them, neat green stripes on the slopes. The roof of my house, a faded red patch near the bottom, smoke rising from the kitchen. Then the view pulled higher and faster, and I could see the whole valley, the river like a silver knife cutting through the land. Then I felt it, a presence above. Not him, not me. Something watching both of us. The vision snapped away and I nearly dropped the cup. My heart raced. I looked up at the actual sky, darkening into deep blue. At first I saw nothing, just a few early stars, the faint silhouette of the mountains on the horizon. Then, like someone had turned on a light behind a veil, I saw it. A point of white, too bright to be a star, too steady to be a plane. It hung over the valley, motionless, impossible. My throat tightened. Somewhere a dog began to bark nervously. Another answered it. "They're looking for you," I whispered, without knowing how I knew. "Aren't they?" Beside me, his breathing changed. He didn't raise his head, but his fingers closed more tightly around the metal cup, as if bracing himself against something I couldn't hear. The faint lines under his skin dimmed, then brightened again, as if responding to a call far away. The light in the sky didn't move. It just hovered. I couldn't tell if it was close or unimaginably distant. I just knew that my farm had never felt so small. Minutes passed. The crickets seemed louder, the forest more alert, as if every living thing around us understood that something was wrong overhead. The point of light flickered once, just once, and then vanished. Not like a plane passing behind a cloud, not like a shooting star. One moment it was there, the next it wasn't. It felt like a held breath finally being released. Slowly the tension eased from his body. He placed the empty cup on the ground and turned his head toward me. When our eyes met, there was no vision this time. No alien landscape, no metal walls. Just a heavy, almost suffocating emotion. Fear. Not mine. His. It dawned on me then, with a clarity that shook me. He wasn't just hiding from humans. He was hiding from them, whoever hovered in those silent lights above the valley. "Who are they to you?" I asked quietly. "Rescuers or hunters?" Of course, he didn't answer. But something in his gaze shifted, like a shadow passing behind a window. Images pulsed at the edge of my mind, fragmented, incomplete. I caught glimpses, rows of figures like him standing in formation, a blinding circular room, a sharp pain in his temple, as if something had been taken from him, or put inside. I closed my eyes and pulled my hand back, breaking the contact. The forest rushed back in. Frogs, leaves, the distant murmur of the river. Simple, earthly noises that suddenly felt incredibly precious. "If they come back," I said, my voice barely more than a breath, "I'll be here." The promise surprised me as much as it must have surprised him. I was just one man in a remote corner of Costa Rica. I had no weapons, no strange technology. Only 2 hands, a stubborn heart, and a secret that grew heavier every day. But the words were out now. I'll be here. Over the next months, the lights returned. Not every night, not always in the same place. Sometimes they appeared far away, dancing silently along the mountain ridges. Other times they hovered directly above the fields, motionless, watching. Every time they came, I felt a pressure behind my eyes, like distant thunder trying to crack through my skull. And every time I found myself going to him, whether it was safe or not. By the early 1990s, my life had split cleanly in 2. By day, I was the quiet farmer, working the land, arguing about prices, fixing fences, sharing coffee with neighbors who had no idea what floated above their heads. By night, I was something else, a witness, a guardian of a secret that no government, no scientist, no news channel had yet discovered. Someone out there was searching, and the one they were searching for was desperately trying not to be found. By the middle of the 1990s, I had grown used to living with a secret that could have changed the world. On the surface, nothing about my life seemed extraordinary. The coffee harvests came and went. Some years were good, others barely enough to keep the farm alive. Neighbors got married, had children, argued about politics and football. Radios played the same old songs in the little pulperia down the road. To anyone watching from the outside, I was just another man from the mountains, rooted in the same soil as my plants. But beneath that normal life, another reality slowly thickened. I had an invisible guest in the forest. His body had changed since that first night in 1989. He was no longer shaking with every movement, no longer collapsing after eating a single piece of bread. The lines under his skin, those faint glowing veins, now pulsed with a more stable rhythm, especially after our strange sessions of contact. Sometimes when I arrived at dusk, I would find him sitting instead of lying down, his back against the rock, watching the fading light through the trees. He seemed more present, not stronger like a man who trains his muscles, but steadier, like a radio finely tuned into the right frequency. With that stability came something else, more control over what he showed me. In the beginning, every touch had been like an uncontrolled burst of images crashing into my mind. Crashes, red skies, metallic corridors, figures like him running. It was chaotic, overwhelming. But over time, the visions became more focused, no longer just flashes, but sequences. I began to suspect that he wasn't just surviving. He was teaching. One evening around 1994, I brought him a thermos of warm water mixed with a little sugar. My mother used that simple remedy whenever one of us felt weak, and I had the stubborn hope that some human trick might help his alien body as well. I knelt beside him and unscrewed the lid slowly, letting the steam escape into the cool air. "Try this," I said quietly. "It helps us." Our fingers brushed as I passed the thermos and the world shifted. I wasn't in the forest anymore. He stood, on a wide platform under a sky so dark it didn't look natural. Above, instead of stars, there were moving points of light arranged in patterns, circling like flocks of artificial birds. Around the platform, towers of smooth material rose without seams or visible supports. In the distance, something like a ring encircled a faint, pale sphere. A voice, not sound, but understanding, echoed inside my skull. Not home. Transit. I didn't hear the word transit, but my mind translated the concept that way. A place between places. A station. A harbor in the void. Then the vision twisted. Now narrow corridors stretched ahead, lit from within the walls by a soft, cold light. Figures like him moved in small groups carrying strange tools, their steps quiet. Some turned their heads as we passed, and for a brief instant I felt it. Curiosity, not fear, but distant, like the way we might watch an insect crossing a table. The sensation changed again. Now, a large circular room. In the center, a column of light descending from the ceiling, humming with power. Around it, consoles or instruments I couldn't understand. A pressure built behind my eyes, as if the very air was heavier there. Something was being decided. The emotion that poured through me then was sharp and bitter. Not excitement, not exploration, duty. The vision snapped back. I was once again kneeling in the damp earth of Costa Rica, my hand still on his, the thermos halfway between us. My chest heaved as if I had just run up the whole mountain. He watched me closely, his eyes reflecting the dim forest like twin mirrors. "You were traveling," I said, struggling to put human words on something that didn't belong to them. Not invading, moving, passing through. He didn't nod, but something in his gaze softened. The lines beneath his skin glowed a fraction brighter. As the years went on, those glimpses formed a broken mosaic in my mind. Little by little, I understood pieces of his story, though never all of it. I saw long journeys between dead worlds. I felt the cold loneliness of space, and I sensed something else. A decision made by others of his kind. A plan. A mission. And yet every time the lights appeared above the valley, that same fear returned to him like a storm. It was in those years that my human life began to crack under the pressure. I forgot things more often. Simple things. A sack of coffee left in the rain. a fence repair promised and never done. I would stand in the middle of a field, staring at the horizon, replaying the visions in my mind, trying to put them into some logical order, while the mundane world tugged at my sleeve. "Estás pensando en otra cosa?" my mother said one evening, handing me a cup of coffee at the kitchen table. "You're here, but you're not here." I forced a smile, felt it stretch wrong on my face. "Just tired," I lied. "The harvest, it's a lot." She watched me for a moment, as if weighing the truth. Parents have their own radar. They can't always tell what's wrong, but they know when something is. Fortunately for me, the only explanation she had came from familiar places. "Maybe you need a wife," she said finally, half teasing, half serious. Too much time alone in those fields makes the mind wander. I laughed, grateful for the normality of the comment. If she had known the real reason I'd become distant, the real cause of the shadows under my eyes, the farm would never have felt safe again. But the secret demanded more than just lies. It demanded sacrifices. One of our dogs disappeared around that time. A loyal animal, always following me up the paths. One night, it ran ahead as I climbed toward the hidden hollow, disappearing into the darkness between the trees. A few seconds later, a sharp yelp cut through the forest, then nothing. I found no blood, no tracks, no sign of a struggle. Only a lingering metallic smell near the place where the path curved away from his shelter. When I reached the hollow, he was there, rigid, his lines glowing faintly as if he had just done something that cost him. I never brought another animal close again. By the mid-1990s, the roles in my life had reversed. The farm was what I did to survive. The forest, the hidden hollow, and the fragile being who waited there, that was where I truly lived. And although I didn't know it yet, every visit, every shared image, every silent promise was slowly leading me toward a truth I wasn't prepared to face. I was not just helping him. I was helping him hide from something that looked disturbingly like authority, and from a fear that, with time, I would discover had everything to do with us. By the late 1990s, my fear of being discovered had almost become a second shadow. From the outside, nothing had changed. I still woke before sunrise, still walked the same paths between coffee rows, still bargained over prices in town like every other farmer. But inside, something had twisted. Every time a car I didn't recognize passed on the dirt road, I watched it too long. Every time a helicopter crossed the sky, even if it was clearly from the government or a nearby farm, my stomach tightened. Because I had started to understand something terrible. He wasn't just afraid of them, the ones in the silent lights above the valley. He was afraid of us. It didn't happen in a single vision. If it had, I think I might have gone mad. Instead, it came like rain carving a canyon, drop by drop, image by image, over years. One night around 1997, I climbed up later than usual. There had been a problem with one of the pipes, and I lost hours repairing it. By the time I entered the untouched patch of forest, the moon was already high, silver light sliding down the trunks in pale ribbons. I carried only a small lantern and a cloth bag with food and water. As I approached the hollow, I felt it before I saw him. A pressure behind my eyes. A strange buzzing in my ears, as if the air itself was humming. It reminded me of the first time I had touched him, but heavier, like a storm cloud pressing down on my skull. He was awake. Not just awake, focused. He sat straighter than usual, his back not resting fully on the rock, his eyes bright, reflecting the moon in perfect black circles. The lines beneath his skin pulsed slowly, in a rhythm that matched the faint vibration in the air. I knelt beside him, setting the bag down. "I'm late," I whispered. "I know. I'm sorry." He didn't reach for the food. Instead, his hand lifted and touched my wrist. I didn't have time to brace myself. The forest vanished. I was in a room that wasn't his and wasn't mine. The light was harsh and white, coming from square panels in the ceiling. The air smelled of disinfectant, metal, and something else, something sweet and rotten underneath. I heard a sound I recognized instantly, even though I had never heard it in person. the high, anxious beep of a human heart monitor. I wanted to move, but my body wasn't mine. I was inside someone else. Inside him. On a table in front of us lay another being like him. Same elongated head, same thin limbs, same strange gray-blue skin. But this one wasn't breathing. Its chest was open, not with clean surgical precision, but with brutal curiosity. Metal instruments were scattered around, some slick with dark fluid. Clear tubes hung from the ceiling, connected to nothing. Around the table moved humans, masks, gloves, eyes bright behind plastic shields. I couldn't understand their language exactly, but I could feel their thoughts, the flavor of their intentions, the cold edge of their fascination. They didn't see a person. They saw a puzzle, a resource, a specimen. Specimen. That was the word my mind gave it. A wave of nausea hit me so hard I staggered even inside the vision. My heart pounded. I wanted to grab them, to scream at them to stop, but I was trapped, forced to watch through his memory. One of the humans took a sharp instrument and cut deeper into the being's chest. No ritual, no reverence for the dead, just method, measure, label, record. Behind the glass wall of the room, others watched, jotting notes, pointing. They weren't monsters. That was the worst part. They looked like the kind of people you'd pass in an airport, or see in a hospital, or sit beside on a bus. This is us, I realized, sickened. This is what we do when nobody is watching. The scene shifted. Now we were in a different place, older, judging by the clothes, the equipment. The film quality of the memory itself felt grainy, like an old recording. A crashed craft, half buried in desert sand, trucks around it, soldiers, cameras. Orders shouted, not with fear, but with excitement. Again, that same feeling from him flooded me. Not just pain for the bodies on those tables, not just grief for the ones who never went home. Betrayal. They had come here once, maybe twice, maybe many times, hoping for contact. They had found dissection. The vision shattered. I fell back onto the damp forest floor, my hands sinking into the moss. The lantern rolled, its light swinging wildly over roots and leaves. For a few seconds I couldn't breathe. The smell of disinfectant clung to me, mixed with the scent of blood that wasn't exactly blood. I grabbed at my own chest, as if expecting to find it open. He watched me. No images now. No probing. Just those black eyes, impossibly deep. The lines beneath his skin dimmed, then brightened again as if he were stabilizing his own emotions, pulling himself away from the memory he had just forced me to share. "Why did you show me that?" I rasped, my throat dry. Why me? No answer, of course, but something inside me already knew. If I was going to keep feeding him, keep hiding him, keep risking everything for him, I needed to understand the full weight of what I was doing. He wasn't hiding from a future danger. He was hiding from a history that had already happened. I forced myself to sit up, my back pressing against the same rock that supported him. For a long time, we just sat there in silence. The forest seemed far away, as if we were deep underwater. No birdsong, no frogs, just my pulse thundering in my ears. "You're afraid of us," I said finally, the words tasting like ash. "Not because you think we might hurt you someday, but because you know we already did." He blinked slowly. Another small fragment surfaced in my mind. Not a full vision, just an impression. His kind, debating, arguing without words. A decision to come here again despite the risk. A mission to observe, to measure, perhaps to see if we had changed. I swallowed hard. "And you still came back," I whispered. "Or they sent you back." The idea made my skin crawl. We were being studied too. The thought wasn't new. I had seen it hinted in previous images, in structures, in instruments I didn't understand. But now, with the image of opened bodies still burned into my mind, the truth pressed against me like a physical weight. To them, we were dangerous animals with tools. To us, they were prizes. That night, when I finally stumbled back down the mountain, I didn't look at the sky. I didn't want to know if something was watching from the dark. I understood then, with a clarity that left me shaking, that this secret was bigger than a single alien, bigger than a small farm in Costa Rica, bigger than my fear of being caught. For the first time, I wasn't sure who I was protecting more by keeping quiet, him from humanity, or humanity from the truth about itself. By the time the new century arrived, I had lived over a decade with him in my shadow. The world outside changed fast. Computers, internet cafes appearing even in small towns. People talking about a future full of technology and promises. Planes crossed the sky more often. Tourists came to see the untouched nature of our mountains, taking pictures of sunsets they didn't really understand. But in my life, the real revolution was still hidden in that patch of old forest. In the early 2000s, something began to shift, subtle at first, like a change in the air before a storm. He grew quieter. That might sound strange coming from a being who never used words. But after so many years, I had learned to read the small signs, the rhythm of the lines under his skin, the strength in his movements, the intensity of the visions when he touched me. All of that had a pattern, a kind of language that my mind slowly learned. That language started to weaken. It began with small things. When I arrived some evenings, he would already be in a deeper, almost lifeless stillness, as if his body had shut down to conserve energy. The dim glow beneath his skin faded faster after every contact. Sometimes, when he reached for food, his hand trembled again, just like in the beginning. It felt like watching someone grow old, except I had no idea how his species measured time. One night, after a long day of heat and broken machinery, I climbed up to the forest with heavier steps than usual. Clouds had gathered over the mountains thick and low, swallowing the stars. I could hear distant thunder rumbling somewhere behind the ridges. As I neared the hollow, the air changed. It wasn't just humidity or the smell of wet leaves. It was a pressure, not as sharp as during the visions, but constant, like a low vibration in my bones. The hair on my arms rose. The forest, usually full of sounds at that hour, seemed to be holding its breath. He was lying on his side when I arrived, not propped against the rock, not sitting. His body looked smaller, his limbs drawn close as if the air itself hurt. The lines beneath his skin were faint, barely visible, flickering like the last glow of embers. For a second, raw panic grabbed me. "No, no, no," I whispered, dropping to my knees beside him. "Not like this, not after all this time." I touched his shoulder. The cold hit me like a wave, but there was no vision at first, just a weight, a heaviness that pulled at my thoughts, threatening to drown them. I gritted my teeth and pushed through, refusing to let go. "Stay with me," I muttered, though I knew he didn't understand the words. "I'm here. I've always been here." Finally, images began to form, fragmented, distorted, as if my mind were tuning into a damaged transmission. I saw a planet I didn't recognize, but this time not from the ground, from above. A sphere, once blue and green, now dustier, browner. When the vision dropped lower, I saw cities, if they could be called that. Structures half buried in sand, towers broken, vast regions abandoned. The feeling that came with the image wasn't shock or grief. It was memory. His people had watched their own world decay. I saw in rapid flashes machines pulling resources from deep beneath that planet's surface, skies filled with thin trails that scarred the atmosphere, oceans shrinking, storms thickening. Then the last clear image, a council of his kind, faces calm but eyes burdened with something heavier than fear. We did this. The thought wasn't mine, but it settled in my chest like a stone. They had built, expanded, consumed, until their world pushed back, until it broke. And when it broke, they looked to the stars for a second chance. The vision twisted. Now I saw Earth. Not our Earth exactly, but a projection of it from their perspective. A young planet, rich, still green and blue, still full of water and breathable air. A world that could have been a new home, or a lesson, maybe both. Then another image flashed, too fast, too bright. Humans, our cities, our factories, our endless highways. Smoke rising, lights spreading across the land like a disease of stars. The feeling that accompanied that image was not curiosity this time. It was dread. I yanked my hand back, gasping. "You see us," I whispered. "You see what we're doing, and you remember what you did. To your own world." His eyes opened slowly, black and bottomless. The lines beneath his skin flickered once when our gazes locked. I felt a pulse, not a visual message, but almost a taste. A flavor of emotion forced into my mind. Again. Not just again as in, you are like we were, but again as in, the same story is beginning to unfold. They weren't just observing us out of scientific interest, they were watching a pattern repeat. Thunder rumbled closer, louder now. A wind moved through the trees, bending branches, carrying the smell of rain and something metallic. I realized my clothes were damp with sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Is that why you're afraid?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Because you know where this road leads." The answer came not in images, but in a feeling so strong it almost broke me. They had watched other worlds too. Worlds that burned, worlds that froze, worlds that never got the chance to correct their mistakes. I saw, just for an instant, another species, nothing like us, building their shining cities along the edge of a purple sea. Then smoke, then fire, then silence. Always the same rhythm. Grow, consume, ignore the warnings, collapse. I pressed my palms into the earth to ground myself, to remind my body that I was still in my world, under my trees, breathing my air. "You're not just afraid of what we've done," I realized aloud, almost more to myself than to him. "You're afraid of what we're capable of, out there, beyond this planet, if we ever leave it for real." Something in his gaze sharpened. For the first time, the fear I felt from him wasn't only about capture, experiments, or torture. It was bigger. It was the terror of someone who has seen a fire before, and now recognizes the first sparks in a dry forest that doesn't even realize it's about to burn. The first heavy drops of rain began to fall, tapping on leaves, darkening the soil around us. I pulled a plastic sheet from my bag, the one I had started bringing years earlier, and gently covered part of his body, protecting him from the worst of the storm. "You're weakening," I said softly. "And they, whoever travels in those lights, are getting closer. I can feel it." He didn't move, but a faint, fragile pulse of warmth reached me through the cold when I touched his arm again. No visions, no lessons, just presence. Thunder cracked overhead, making the forest flinch. As the rain intensified, drumming on the leaves, a terrifying thought slid quietly into my mind. Maybe he hadn't just crashed here by accident. Maybe someone had left him here, not as a scout, not as an invader, but as a warning system, like a living alarm placed on a world that was beginning to resemble one they had already lost. And now, as he faded, the real question began to grow in me like a dark seed. When he finally disappeared, whether by death or retrieval, what would those watching from above decide to do with a species like ours, once they were sure we were following the same path? The first time someone else walked too close to his forest, I felt it like a punch in the chest. By the mid-2000s, the farm around me was changing, not because of aliens or secret lights in the sky, because of money. Some neighbors had sold pieces of land to foreign investors who wanted to build eco-lodges and experience the real Costa Rica. Tourists with expensive boots and rented binoculars started appearing on the trails, pointing at birds and waterfalls, taking pictures of everything. Everything, except the one thing that really didn't belong there. I had always counted on the isolation of that untouched patch of forest to keep him safe. The hollow was off the usual paths, hidden behind a bend, protected by my own silence and my father's old superstition. People worked around it because we always had. But money doesn't respect old stories. One afternoon, I was repairing a fence post near the upper part of the property when I heard laughter coming from the wrong direction. Not the familiar voices of my neighbors, but bright, loud English echoing through the trees. I froze. The sound was coming from above the coffee fields, from the side that led toward the untouched forest, a place where nobody had any business walking. I dropped the hammer without thinking and started up the hill. Every step felt like a bad dream where your legs don't move fast enough. Branches grabbed at my clothes. Roots tried to catch my boots, and my heart hammered so hard I could hear it in my ears. As I climbed, the voices grew clearer. "Look at this. It's so wild. Careful, man, you'll twist an ankle. There's no trail here." Dude, that's exactly the point. 3 of them, young, excited. One of them laughed again, that nervous, joking laughter of someone who doesn't understand how close they are to something serious. The closer I got, the more wrong everything felt. For years, that area had been quiet, a place out of time. Now I heard twigs snapping, leaves being crushed, careless footsteps where every step should have been taken carefully. And beneath all that, like a second heartbeat, I felt it. That low pressure in my skull. He was awake, and he knew they were there. I stepped out from behind a cluster of shrubs and saw them at last. 3 men in bright hiking clothes, backpacks too clean, shoes too new. One had a camera hanging from his neck. Another pointed at a tree, explaining something he obviously didn't really understand. The third was ahead of the others, pushing forward, exactly in the direction of the hollow. "Hey," I called, my voice sharper than I intended. "You shouldn't be here." All 3 stopped and turned. To them I must have looked like just another local farmer. Muddy boots, worn shirt, sweat on my forehead. A man out of place in his own land. "Hola, amigo," the one with the camera said, smiling too wide. His Spanish was clumsy but enthusiastic. "We're just exploring." "There's nothing up there," I lied, forcing my voice to stay level. "It's dangerous. The ground is unstable. You could fall." "Looks fine to me," the one in front muttered in English to his friend. I switched languages. "It's not fine," I said in English, making sure they heard the weight behind the words. "This part of the mountain isn't for tourists." The surprise on their faces told me they hadn't expected me to understand them. The leader hesitated, then shrugged with an apologetic smile. "We saw a gap in the trees on the road," he said. "Figured there might be a viewpoint. We won't go far." "You've already gone too far," I replied, stepping between them in the direction of the hollow. My tone was calm, but inside my mind alarm bells were screaming. "There's a trail lower down. Go back to it. If you want a view, I'll show you a safe place." For a second, stubbornness flickered in the lead hiker's eyes. Then he looked around, at the dense trees, the uneven slope, the total lack of real path, and something like common sense finally nudged him. Okay, he said, lifting his hand slightly. "Didn't mean any trouble." They turned around, grumbling half-jokingly about territorial locals and secret spots. I walked with them until the forest opened onto the real trail again, my body blocking any subtle attempts to sneak a glance back. Only when they were far enough down the hill, their voices fading, did I let myself breathe. But the damage was already done. The forest now knew other feet had crossed that invisible boundary. I went up to the hollow immediately. The moment I entered the depression, I felt the heaviness in the air double. He was sitting against the rock, but his posture was unnaturally rigid, as if every muscle, whatever counted as muscle in his body, was tight with tension. The lines beneath his skin glowed brighter than usual, pulsing faster. "You felt them," I said quietly. It wasn't a question. His eyes locked onto mine. When his hand reached out, it did so with more force than I'd seen in months. His fingers closed around my wrist, and before I could brace myself, the world shifted. I saw our forest, from his perspective. Not through my own eyes walking the path, but through his senses. He saw the trees as columns of shifting energy, the air as layers of movement and temperature. Then he focused farther out. 3 bright shapes, those hikers, moving clumsily through the undergrowth, leaving a kind of trail behind them that wasn't just footprints, a disturbance, a pattern. Then the vision zoomed higher, above the mountain into the sky. There, hidden behind clouds and distance, a faint, barely visible shimmer. Not bright like the lights I had seen before, softer, like heat waves over a road. Watching. Not just me, the impression whispered into my mind. Them too. They hadn't just risked discovering him. They had risked revealing themselves to the watchers above. The vision snapped back. My wrist hurt where he held it. He let go slowly, his fingers loosening as if every motion cost energy. "You're not just hiding in my forest," I whispered, realization settling over me like cold rain. "You're hiding this whole place, my farm, my valley, from them." The fear I felt from him then was layered. Fear of humans stumbling too close, fear of human curiosity connecting the wrong dots, and fear of that silent shimmer above deciding that this little patch of earth had become too noisy to ignore. I stood there listening to the wind moving through the leaves, my heart still racing from the encounter with the tourists. For years I had thought keeping him secret was about protecting him. But now, for the first time, I understood something darker. By keeping their eyes away from this piece of land, by acting as his shield and his voice, I had unintentionally taken on another role. I wasn't just hiding an alien from humanity. I was hiding a tiny piece of humanity from something that was measuring us and deciding what we might become. By 2010, I had convinced myself that nothing could surprise me anymore. I was wrong. The forest had become a second home to me, more familiar than my own house. I knew every bend in the hidden path, every twisted root, every patch of moss that glowed faintly in the damp. I had learned to move without noise, without hesitation, as if the trees themselves were guiding me. But that year something changed. Not in him, in the mountain. It began on a warm night in late August. The rainy season had been heavy, too heavy, and the soil felt swollen beneath my boots as I climbed toward the hollow. The air smelled of wet bark and distant lightning. Cicadas screamed from the branches. Even the moonlight seemed tense. When I reached the edge of the untouched forest, the world shifted. Not visually, not physically, but sensorially. The air was charged, electric in a way I had only felt during my strongest visions with him. Except this time, it wasn't coming from him. It was coming from above. I quickened my pace, pushing branches aside as quietly as possible. The low, familiar heaviness in my head intensified. My heartbeat quickened, but not from fear, from instinct. Something was happening. When I finally descended into the hollow, he was standing. Standing. For years, he had barely been able to sit upright without support. And now he stood fully on his feet, thin frame outlined against the faint moonlight that filtered through the leaves. His posture wasn't natural. Every muscle looked tense. Every line beneath his skin glowed too brightly, pulsing like warning lights. He turned toward me with a speed that was almost reflexive. And for the first time in over 2 decades, I saw a new emotion in him. Urgency. Before I could speak, the ground trembled. Just slightly, just enough to make loose soil shift under my boots. A deep, resonant hum rolled across the valley. Not thunder, not wind, a frequency, a call. His eyes widened, black surfaces reflecting not me, but the sky above us. I followed his gaze, and then I saw them. 3 lights, faint at first, like distant stars that had wandered into the wrong part of the sky. They weren't blinking. They weren't following any flight pattern. They hovered in a perfect triangle, motionless, silent, suspended over the ridge like the sky was holding its breath. My throat tightened. "They're back," I whispered. But the moment the words left my lips, the lights moved. Not like aircraft. No acceleration, no curve, no inertia. They simply shifted, as if reality skipped a frame. One moment they were above the ridge. The next, directly over our side of the valley. Brighter, sharper, larger. The mountain trembled again. He stepped closer to me, and the pulse of fear rolling off him hit me like cold wind. When his hand gripped my wrist, the vision slammed into my skull so hard I staggered. No fragmented images this time. A message. A single, clear sequence. I saw a room full of his kind. Tall, thin, luminous, surrounded by displays of worlds, dozens of worlds, each represented by swirling clouds of data and energy. I saw Earth among them, a fragile sphere glowing blue, green, and brown. A symbol pulsed above it. A warning. Then I saw the three lights, not as I saw them with my human eyes, but through the perception of his species. They weren't lights. They were probes, sensors, eyes, and they had found something. Not him. Me. The forest spun around me. I felt my mind stretch, pulled between two understandings, human fear and alien logic. I dropped to one knee, clutching my head as the vision intensified. I saw myself entering the hollow, feeding him, touching him, learning from him, carrying pieces of his memory in my mind. And then, my consciousness flagged. Something else intervened. A flash of sterile labs, humans cutting open his kind. Another flash, Earth's cities glowing red in the dark. Another, his world, collapsing into storms. His emotion poured into me like ice water. If they detect you fully, they will retrieve not only me, but what I have placed inside you. I gasped, the forest snapping back into focus. They weren't just tracking him. They were tracking contamination. Me, his memories, his knowledge, his exposure to humanity, his connection to a single human mind. I looked up at the sky again. The three lights had brightened, forming a perfect vertical alignment now. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the trunks of the trees, making leaves shiver and tiny droplets of mist rise from the soil. The mountain wasn't just listening, it was responding. "Are they coming for you?" I whispered, breath shaking. "Or for us?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached up, one long trembling finger pointing directly at me. A pulse of fear hit my chest. "You must choose." The meaning was clear. If they retrieved him, they might erase everything connected to him, including my mind. If they didn't retrieve him, they might decide another outcome. The hum intensified again, shaking my ribs. The sky glowed. And then the lights moved, downward, toward us. Not fast, slow, deliberate, searching, measuring, deciding. I stepped in front of him without thinking, my body forming a shield where no human should ever have needed to stand. The air crackled. The forest held its breath. The lights descended, and everything went white. When the world turned white, I thought I had died. There was no sound, no weight, no forest beneath my feet. Just a blinding, living brightness that seemed to pour into my bones. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I couldn't even panic. The light was too complete, too absolute, swallowing every sense I had ever relied on. Then, like a thin thread pulling me back, I felt something tug at my wrist. His hand. Even in the blinding void, I could feel the cold outline of his fingers clinging to me. That anchor kept me from falling into the light entirely. It held me to myself. The brightness dimmed. Not all at once, but in pulses, as if it were stepping backward to reveal the world again. First came sound, the low hum that had shaken the mountain. Then came smell, wet earth, moss, distant rain. Then came shape, a faint outline of trees, shimmering as though seen through water. And then finally came darkness, real darkness, broken only by the three lights above us. Except they were no longer three. They had formed a single vertical column, rotating slowly, each light the size of a house now, glowing with a color I don't have a name for. Not white, not blue. Something in between, something that felt like cold intelligence pressed into light. A beam descended from the column, wide at the top, narrowing as it neared the ground, like a funnel of pure energy. It wasn't touching us, it was scanning us. The air vibrated with a strange rhythm, almost like a heartbeat, but mechanical, emotionless, relentless. My teeth buzzed, my vision blurred around the edges. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. He stood behind me, still holding my wrist, his grip weaker now. I could feel the tremble in his arms, the strain in his breathing. The glow beneath his skin pulsed rapidly, like a warning light about to fail. Then the hum changed. It sharpened, shifted, became more focused. The beam moved, not toward him, toward me. A cold jolt shot through my chest. "No," I whispered, not sure if I said it aloud or only thought it. "No, look at him, not me." But the beam didn't care. It surrounded me, weightless but suffocating, as if 1,000 invisible fingers were pulling apart the layers of my mind. My memories began flashing without my permission. Not memories of him. Not visions he had shown me. My memories. My childhood. My father's voice. My mother teaching me to plant coffee. My brother falling from a tree and laughing. My first kiss. My first heartbreak. My first glimpse of the alien in the hollow. Years of nights sneaking up the path. Years of feeding him in silence. Years of touching him, learning him, absorbing pieces of his world. They were taking inventory, not of who I was, but of what I had become. A bridge, a contamination, a human carrying fragments of something not meant for humans. My knees buckled. I fell forward, catching myself on one hand, the beam tightening around me like a funnel made of ice and pressure. My vision flickered, and then his hand slipped from mine. I felt it before I saw it. That cold, fragile grip that had anchored me for 21 years simply let go. When I turned, he was on his knees, his whole body shaking violently, the lines under his skin flickering like dying stars. He wasn't looking at the beam. He was looking at them, not the lights, the presence behind them. A presence I could feel now too, something vast, ancient, heavy with decision. A consciousness woven into the machine or controlling it, I couldn't tell. But it wasn't neutral. It was evaluating, assessing, choosing. A pulse shot from the beam, hitting the ground beside me like a silent explosion of force. The earth trembled. Dust rose. My ears popped painfully. Then the presence pushed into my mind. Hard. Not like his gentle, accidental visions. More like a drill. It wasn't asking permission. It plunged through my thoughts, tearing through barriers, ripping open everything it wanted. I screamed, silently, because my voice wouldn't come. But the pain wasn't physical. It was existential. It wasn't trying to hurt me. It was trying to understand me, to weigh me, to decide my fate. Suddenly, the presence recoiled. I didn't understand why at first, until I saw him. He had risen again, barely, shaking, collapsing in slow motion, but up. His hand rested against my back, not grabbing, not holding, but touching. A single point of contact, and that was enough. A shockwave of emotion, not vision, not memory, burst outward from him. Grief, fear, loneliness, hope, regret, warning, warning, warning. It wasn't aimed at me. It was aimed at them. I felt the beam shudder around me like a machine confused by an unexpected variable. The lights flickered. The hum wavered. The presence hesitated. All at once, the truth became clear. He wasn't just hiding on my mountain. He was defecting, refusing to be found, refusing to be retrieved, refusing to return to a system that had already sacrificed worlds to cold calculations. He wasn't the fugitive of an alien fleet. He was the dissenting voice of a civilization that had forgotten compassion. He had come to Earth because he saw something here, something broken, dangerous, yes, but something worth saving. Maybe something his kind had once lost. And now, because of me, because of the years we had shared, because of the fragile bond between two beings who should never have met, they knew it. They saw it. The beam collapsed. The lights shook. The presence surged in fear. Theirs, not his. Because in that single act of defiance, he had given them a message that changed everything. Humans might be dangerous, but we were not hopeless. He fell forward. I caught him as gently as I could. The forest went silent. The beam extinguished. The sky returned to darkness. And for the first time I realized they hadn't come to take him. They had come to erase what he had created. A bridge between our species. A bond that should not exist. A reason to fear us, or a reason to let us live. And in that trembling moment, holding him as the lights pulled away, I understood something terrifying. They had not yet decided which one. For a long time after the night of the beam, I thought that was the end of it. The lights left. The hum faded. The forest slowly remembered how to breathe again. He didn't die that night, but he was never the same. In the years that followed, he grew quieter still. The visions almost stopped. When I touched him, I no longer saw clear images of alien stations, dead worlds, or dissected bodies. I saw small things instead. A leaf. A drop of water. A piece of bread on a rock. Details. As if a mind that had once held galaxies was now lingering on the smallest pieces of reality, trying to savor what remained. I visited less often, not because I wanted to, but because time was hunting me too. My mother aged. The farm demanded more repairs. My knees began to ache on the steeper slopes. The world outside became louder, brighter, more connected. Phones got smarter. People got busier. Satellites multiplied overhead. But the hollow remained. Always there. Always waiting. By 2022, 33 years had passed since the first night I found him curled in the moss like a discarded doll. 33 years of food and silence and fear and impossible light. I wasn't sure, walking up the path that evening, whether I would find him still alive. The air was cooler than it had been in a long time. A soft fog hugged the ground, glowing slightly in the dim light. The forest felt respectful somehow, quieter than usual, as if it too sensed an ending. When I stepped down into the hollow, my heart clenched. He was there, smaller than I remembered somehow, thinner. The lines beneath his skin were barely visible now, faint embers in a cooling fire. His head tilted toward me as I approached, his eyes still impossibly black. Time hadn't written itself on his face the way it did on ours, but the weight of years was there all the same. "I'm still here," I said, my voice rougher than before. "You lasted longer than any of us had a right to expect." I knelt beside him, my bones protesting. I set down the small offering I still brought by habit, bread, water. He didn't reach for it. Instead, with a trembling effort, he lifted his hand. For a moment I hesitated. The last big contact in 2010 had nearly broken me. Since then, the visions had been small, almost gentle. But something in the way he moved now, slow, deliberate, final, told me this would not be like those. I placed my hand in his. The cold was weaker than before. The light that came wasn't. I was standing. No, we were standing far above Earth. Not in a ship. Not in a real place at all. In a memory space. A mental vantage point his kind used to observe, to evaluate. Below us, the planet turned slowly, blue and white and beautiful. Around it, like fireflies frozen in amber, hovered tiny points of artificial light. Satellites, stations, machines built by hands that had only just learned to leave their cradle. I felt his emotion flow through me, not the dread I had grown used to, but something deeper, more complex. Concern, recognition, déjà vu. Then the perspective shifted. I saw his world again, long before it died. From above, it looked much like ours. Clouds, oceans, land. But the space around it had been crowded. Structures in orbit, rings of machinery, stations glimmering like a necklace made of technology. They had reached the same point. They had looked at their planet from the outside and said, "We are gods now." And that was when they stopped listening to it. Images flashed faster. Factories in the upper atmosphere. Energy drawn from the planet's core. Oceans poisoned slowly by temporary solutions. Warnings dismissed as pessimism. Refugee ships built not to fix the damage but to escape it. Then a council, the same one I'd seen before. No anger in their faces, just tired acceptance. We will find another world. We will try again. We will be careful this time. They weren't monsters. They were us. Further down the road, the vision snapped back to Earth. Cities glowed below, spreading every year, climbing into mountains, devouring forests. Our machines orbited above, measuring everything, understanding so little. Rockets ripped the sky. Plans formed to colonize nearby planets, to mine asteroids, to expand without limit. We weren't there yet, but we were heading in the same direction, step by step. And suddenly, finally, he answered the question that had haunted me for decades. Not with words, with a feeling that hit me so hard I nearly lost consciousness. He didn't fear us because we were violent. His people had survived violence. He didn't fear us because we were curious. They had worshipped curiosity. He feared us because we were something his civilization no longer was, young enough to change, and stubborn enough not to. They feared a species that could look at its own ruin, in pollution, in wars, in collapsing systems, and still say, "We'll fix it later. For now, more." They feared that if we reached the stars before we learned humility, we would repeat their pattern, but without the last fragments of conscience that had driven him to defect. He showed me one last image. Not a planet, not a ship, me. In the hollow of the forest years earlier, handing him a piece of bread with shaking fingers. No lab, no scalpel, no cage, just fear and compassion battling in a single human heart. This, the feeling said, is what they lost. That tiny contradiction inside us, the capacity for cruelty and kindness, horror and sacrifice, destruction and mercy, terrified them more than any weapon. Because if we ever learned to align our technology with our better instincts instead of our worst ones, we wouldn't just be dangerous. We would be powerful in a way they had never been, capable of choosing not to repeat the cycle. The vision faded. The forest returned. His hand slipped from mine, lighter than a dry leaf. The lines beneath his skin flickered once, and went dark. I stayed there for a long time, kneeling beside his still body, listening to the mountain breathe around us. No lights appeared in the sky that night. No hum, no beam of judgment. Just the quiet, just my thoughts. Just the final answer to a question that had taken 33 years to form. He feared us, because we are the only species he had ever seen that stood with one foot in extinction and the other in redemption, refusing to choose. And somewhere out there, watching our satellites multiply and our rockets rise, they still don't know which way we will fall. Sometimes when I walk the fields at night, I look up at the sky and talk quietly, as if someone is listening. "I fed one of yours for 33 years, I say. He could have betrayed us. He didn't." Then I add the part I never thought I'd mean. "We scare you because you don't know if we'll destroy everything or finally become what you failed to be." The wind moves through the coffee plants like a slow answer. No lights flash, no beam descends, but I know this now. They are not the only ones watching. We are too. And that more than anything else is what he hoped for when he chose to trust a frightened farmer in a forgotten corner of Costa Rica. Not that we were good, not that we were evil, but that one day we would finally understand why he feared us, and decide together to become something worth fearing for the right reasons.